Morning, guys. Dr. Ken Nordberg again with another fireside deer hunting seminar. Before I start, I want to say something about this coronavirus that's going around. It's starting to look kind of serious here in Minneapolis. It took a while to get to Minnesota, but we're at the point now where number of people being sick with this disease are doubling in number every day. And I expect that, it won't be long, and I'm going to have to roll some boulders against the door of my house and become a recluse. So I don't know, but we might have an interruption here. I've been trying to do 2 or 3 of these a week, but we might have a time here when you're not going to hear from me for a while. But I'm at the bullseye of people who are most likely to die from this disease being in my 80s. So I want to be around a while. I want to finish teaching you all about how to take older bucks regularly, and because it's fun for me and it's good for you, good for deer hunting and good for deer. And I really want to finish this someday. and like I say, I like doing it. So, but we might, this darn disease is kind of changing a lot in our lives right now, and it'll probably do so for the next month or two. But but one of these days maybe we'll do some recording in my home, in my office, full of mounts. You'll probably find that kind of interesting. And so we might do that instead of doing this here at my son's house in 30 miles from my home. Well, now I've taught you why older bucks are so difficult to hunt. We've been through that nitty-gritty thing. Well, so now we're going to start a new series about how to hunt these deer, and in ways that we take advantage of some of the vulnerabilities of these bucks. And I call this new series called How to Hunt Older Bucks During a Hunting Season. And the first thing that comes to mind when I teach this is how to use deer signs to hunt those deer. And this first of this series is about using deer tracks to hunt those deer. Now, there are a lot of people who think this isn't that important or don't even want to believe it's important. But I spent a lot of years beginning back in the 1960s, all the way up till the 1980s, studying deer tracks. And I was so devoted to it because in the beginning I knew that lengths of tracks of various deer were going to be very important in buck hunting. I knew that was going to be true. I started teaching other people how to use deer signs to hunt older bucks back in 1980, various ways. I put on hunting schools. 20 guys at a time come from all over the United States to learn these things in my deer country in the far northern part of Minnesota, up near the Canadian border. And gee, that was fun. But 20 at a time hardly touches even just a fraction of the number of deer hunters there are in the United States. There's 15 million of us who hunt whitetails. And so today there are a lot of people who don't know anything about this. But it's important, and it's so important that I consider it to be more important than anything I've taught you so far about how to hunt older bucks. Back in, the first book I wrote about this particular subject was back in 1991. And it's my 4th edition of Whitetail Hunter's Almanac. And it's got everything about how important tracks are in hunting. On the cover of the book, it talks about a guide to 200 signs of whitetail deer and the sign method of hunting whitetails. And it was called the sign method. I had people who used to say it was Dr. Nordberg's Sherlock Holmes method of hunting whitetails, using deer signs. Now, right now you have no idea, most of you, those that I've taught personally know how important it is, and people who have been reading my magazine articles for all these years, for 40 years, realize how important it is, but that's still a small fraction. Through the power of YouTube, now lots of you are going to learn how important this is, and I'm looking forward to doing this. What I'm going to do today is convince you how important deer tracks are and other signs, but deer tracks today are to hunting whitetails. And this sign method, like I said, I've been doing it not only in book form and magazine articles, in my hunting schools. And this sign method is covered in detail in DVDs that I have that are now available from those original hunting schools that were recorded by my son John, and he created these videos. But this sign method's been around for a long time. Another thing, we started producing these things back, so-called whitetail sign guides, back in the 1980s, early 80s. And boy, they've been such a popular, they call them whitetail sign guides, and the very first of the sign guides in the series, which hunters use their laminated cards, is this card. And it tells you how to identify deer from the lengths of their tracks. And also it teaches you how to figure out what deer are thinking or doing, which is important. Tracks can enable you to do that on the back of the card. But these have been around for a long time, and they're still, it's still a popular thing. I have orders for these things all the time, even today after all these years. Well, this book covers this subject of using whitetail deer signs to hunt whitetails more than any publication I've ever written. And in fact, on, page 174, in the beginning I used to think the longest track measurement was a better way to identify deer than just the hoof only. And the longest track back then was the tip of the track to the impressions made by dew claws in a track. And you see on the sign guide here, here's a picture of a hoof and these little dots behind it that where the dew claws touch the ground. Well, I learned over the years, like down in Texas, I spent 18 years down there studying whitetails and photographing them. And I noticed down there you hardly ever saw those little pointy things called dew claws in a track of a whitetail. We see them here in Minnesota, especially in the wintertime, because those dew claws will poke into the snow behind the track. So in the beginning, I used to measure the distance in soft soils. Speaking of soft soils, I think I might have mentioned it one time or another. I used to go up year-round to study tracks, and I remember back in my first study area in Aiken Colony, I used to go up there all times of the year in the summer and rake stretches of deer trails, nice and smooth, where the ground was kind of soft. So I could go back there later and find really clear impressions of tracks with dew claws in the ground. And I remember one time I was up there in midsummer, and I'd make a quick trip. It was about 135 miles drive from my house to this place. I'd go out there in the woods in these sections of trails, some that were close to buck bedding areas, some feeding areas, places like that, and rake sections of them and keep that dirt nice and smooth. And I was up there this one time, and in the summer, and the mosquitoes were awful, and it started to rain and thunder and lightning, and it was raking, and I finally got done with that day's raking, and I was heading back to where my truck was parked off the road in the woods. And I got out to the main road. It was just a narrow one-lane road going through the woods to get to this place. And I just come out of the woods, and here's a vehicle, a car coming toward me out there in the woods. And I was all wet and dirty and out in the middle of nowhere, and there's this car, and there was an elderly man and woman in the car. I see, and they were coming closer, and their jaws were dropped down. They were looking at me like there's some kind of crazy guy coming out of the woods in the rainstorm with a rake. He has to be crazy. And they looked alarmed, you know. I was standing there on the side waiting for them to go by, and when they got close, the guy almost drove off the road to stay away from me. I don't know if he thought I was going to hit their car with a rake or something, but they got around. When he got by me, he floored it. Boy, did they go fast from there. But I wonder what kind of story they had been telling people for years after that encounter out there. But I did a lot of measurements, and I did a lot of weighing of whitetails and measuring tracts of whitetails, and came up with graphs like the ones you see here on my left. So let's talk about it. We'll start with that. And because I'm going to convince you once and for all that you got to be measuring tracts all the time when you're hunting whitetails. Now, this first graph is this one. You see that? And what this is a age versus weight of whitetails. And there's the buck range is, you see this wide area here where that range is wide. And then there's the doe range here, there's a single line. The doe range doesn't vary a whole much. You see here, when a whitetail is a fawn, you know, his tracks or his weight is way down here, 80, 90. Our fawns, when we hunt beginning in early November, weigh around 80 pounds on the average. And our yearling does, yearlings are a year and a half. Our does they'll weigh about 120 pounds on the average. Yearling bucks will weigh about 130. By that time they're bigger deer already than does. Now when they get to be 2.5, that's an adult deer. And the does are already up there weighing about 140, 130, 140, 150 pounds. Our does 2.5 years of age or older. And they don't change much after that. They pretty much stay in that 140 to 150 pound range. They might look fatter. There are a few that are bigger. And that's true of tracts as well. But just because there's a few differences, there aren't many, doesn't mean it's no good. The dumbest thing you can do is ignore measuring deer tracks when you're hunting whitetails, because they are so important. There might be a few that are different, but don't disregard the value of measuring deer tracks when hunting whitetails. And so forget that. Well, bucks, you see the range can vary quite a bit in size of the bucks, but the most important part of this is, you know, by the time a buck is 2.5 years old, he's weighing up to 195 pounds. He's quite a bit bigger than the doe of that same age. When the doe is 3.5, it's going to be about 140 pounds. But the bucks at that age, they're already beginning to be quite a bit bigger. A 2.5-year-old buck can weigh 195 pounds where we hunt up in northern Minnesota. They can be that big already. But when they get up into the bigger ages, you know, like a 3.5-year-old, he can weigh maybe 240 pounds live, you know. And when they get to be 4.5 to 6.5-year-olds, they can weigh up over 300 pounds where we hunt. A lot of our dominant breeding bucks, the biggest bucks in the woods, they're 4.5 to 6.5 years of age, will weigh about 305 pounds live, and they dress out about 245 pounds. That's a pretty good sized animal. That animal is huge compared to a doe, a mature doe. See, the mature doe is down here. You get some of those big dominant breeding bucks, they're twice as big as a doe, weight-wise. They're not stature-wise necessarily. They're taller, sure, but they're heavier, more muscular animals. They're bigger animals. And because of that, it's safe for me to say little deer have little tracks, little footprints. Medium-sized deer have medium-sized tracks or hoof prints. And those great big deer have much bigger tracks or hoof prints. So, because of that, it's possible to identify whitetails by the lengths of their tracks. And there is nothing else, no other deer sign in the woods that can enable you to do this. But it's so valuable. If you want to hunt big bucks, you can, once you understand this, you can say, boy, there's a big one there. That's a big track where we hunt. If it's a 4-inch track, it's as big as they get where we hunt, a 4-inch track. Boy, would we like to take that buck. After that, we can key on deer that have tracks that large only. So ignore all those 3-inch tracks, the 3.5. We aren't going to be interested in those. We want tracks, well, maybe 3 3/4 inch in length, just for the hoof only, or 4-inch for hoof only. If we stick to those from all the time we hunt, all the scouting we do, everything, we are keying on big bucks only. And that in itself enormously increases your odds of taking a big buck each hunting season. And that in itself enormously increases your odds of taking a big buck each hunting season. That's something interesting, isn't it? Isn't that interesting? You can't miss being a hunter who spends all of his time hunting older bucks if you measure deer tracks and understand that. That 3.5-inch track there, it could be a yearling buck. They're about the same size as a mature doe, an older doe. But from that time on, all tracks made by deer, all deer that make tracks that are significantly longer than 3 inches are bucks. They're 2.5 to 6.5-year-old bucks, and like I said before, a few survive past their 7th winter, but those are all bucks with bigger tracks. You guys that are hanging trail cams in trees to see what kind of deer out there, you can do just as well with a ruler, measuring tracks in the woods. Better, actually. You know, of all the deer that the 105 bucks that my 3 sons and I have taken since 1990, all those deer, we never saw one of them personally, none of them personally, before the moments before we raised our rifle and centered our rifle scope on during the hunting season. Never saw them. Only 3 of the bucks we've taken in those since 1990 were taken at sites where they were photographed by a trail cam. All the rest were taken somewhere else. 102 of them were taken somewhere else, sometimes a mile away from where they were photographed. In fact, that's not uncommon, mile away from where they were photographed. And the reason is, a lot of times where they were photographed, they were doing something else. Does were not in heat during that period, for example. And each doe is only in heat one day, 24 to 26 hours, and so buck can be where she is this day and then another doe somewhere else the next day. And you've learned all these things already listening to my seminars here. Holy cow, though we never saw those bucks until here he was now, finally, after all the work we've done to figure out where he lives and deciding where to hunt. We always knew they were there. We knew that those particular bucks, we knew a buck with 4-inch tracks lived in this area long before we got him, long before we decided where to put up our tree stands, sometimes, or our ground level stand site. We knew that buck was in the area, and in fact, a lot of times we went out there in the morning and we found the track on the way out there, maybe moments or minutes. The track made just shortly before we came along, and he's now out there in this feeding area, and then first light comes and here it is 15 minutes after legal shooting time. There he is with a doe in heat right in front of you, and you get him. Those tracks enable us to know where to hunt big bucks. Moments before we see them, during the next few hours that we're hunting, like say in the morning, we go out there in the morning, during the next 2, 3, 4 hours, that buck is very likely in the near vicinity during that period, or those tracks enable us to figure out where that buck is likely to be later today, like in the evening, or tomorrow morning, the next morning, or 2 weeks from now when we're scouting before the hunt scene. Those tracks enable us to figure out where to hunt that big buck during the opening weekend, and then we stay out of there during that 2-week period. Or in some cases, deer signs even tell us where to hunt a year from now. So deer signs are that important to hunting. There's no guesswork involved. You know, we don't depend on luck. You know, I think I'll sit here and maybe a big buck will come along and I'll get him. But you only get about 1 or 2 big bucks that way in a lifetime, most people. Unless you're hunting in a fenced area and paying a lot of money to hunt there. No, it's that's how important deer signs are. This sign method of hunting whitetails is a huge, huge thing in whitetail. Everything you've done this far, no matter how you've hunted, if you have not been doing that, you've been really missing the boat. So if you want to be close to whitetails all the time, do that. You know, I'm talking about all the years I spent. Also, this graph was made that matched live weights of whitetails with the lengths of their tracks. And it's pretty steady increase in growth of whitetails. You know, as they grow and become heavier and heavier, their tracks get longer and longer. That could only be done by years and years of measuring the tracks of whitetails. A lot of times I measured their track. I'd be sitting in tree stands. In the beginning, I didn't want to just guess about who made this track or that track. Here's a track. But I'd be sitting in tree stands, and I did that all I could for many, many years. Beginning in, well, especially about 1970, between 1970 and 1980. I was doing things scientifically then. I'd see a buck, a yearling buck, a 2.5-year-old buck, those were easy to figure out what they are, walking on a trail. And soon afterwards, I would get down from my platform, my primitive platforms that I used back then, and go over and measure that track. When we took whitetails, I'd measure the track with the deer hanging in their camp. When neighboring hunters got deer, I'd go visit their camp and measure their tracks as well. But I kept doing this until I could be absolutely certain there'd be some error in that, just like humans. All humans are different, more different really than whitetails. But I finally came to the conclusion that this is right. Now, here's another one here. This will be even more convincing. Take a look at this picture. Now, these are hoofs of various deer, and the top one here is a fawn, and then right below that fawn's hoof print is a hoof of a yearling doe, and you see it's a little bit bigger. And here's a yearling buck, and that's a little bit bigger than a yearling doe. You see that? And then down below here, here's a 2.5-year-old buck or doe. And her hoof is bigger than those. You see they get progressively larger as those deer get older. Here's one of a buck, 2.5 years old, and he's got a chipped tip on one hoof there. But you see the total length of his hoof is quite a bit different than the doe, mature doe. Then here's a hoof of a 3.5-year-old buck, and you see he's got bigger hoof than any of them. You see that? You can depend on that for the rest of your life as a deer hunter. Those deer have different length tracks. And there's some other things to know about that. You know, let's take a, here's a side view of some tracks. And here's a front hoof and here's a hind hoof. Now you see these little dark things, these pointed things behind them on this picture. Those are the dew claws of a whitetail. And you might wonder, why do whitetails have those things? Well, they're really important when they're walking on real soft soil, like say moss out in a peat bog or muddy soil somewhere. When they're walking on those, they'll spread their hoofs. You see the hoofs are cloven. There are two sides to them. You see that here? It's not one hoof like on a horse, but two hoofs. And they can spread that out and increase the width of their hoof when they're walking if they need to. So they don't sink into the ground so deeply. And then also, when that happens, they're sinking into the ground, they can spread the width of those dew claws as well, so that there's more width there, so that these things keep them from sinking deeply. They become even more important when the deer is bounding. You know, when they bound, they can't always pick out where they're going to run. A lot of times they'll run directly into a elder swamp or a cedar swamp or a spruce bog, places like that where hunters don't care to follow, with a lot of water out there. And when they do that, those dew claws come down closer to the ground. They can bend their hoofs so the dew claws become part of the whole hoof when they're moving. And the front ones don't have to come down. They're closer to this because they don't bend those front ones as far, but the back ones, there's a joint here that enables them to flatten that whole thing out, so when that hoof reaches the ground, everything from the dew claws forward to the front of the hoofs is touching the ground. And that's kind of important. You know, like when a big buck is bounding through the woods, and if he happens to be one of those great big guys, he weighs 305 pounds, he's going to have a good wide platform on those hind hoofs in order to sink deeply into the ground when he's running and to launch that 300 pounds into the air over a leap as long as 25 feet, 8 feet up in the air. A lot of power that goes into those big bounds. And having that wide hoof area from their dew claws forward, when they're bounding, this whole thing touches the ground, enables them to keep from sinking deeply into the ground when they're going like that. So that's important. Gives them traction too on slippery surfaces, like you know, kind of icy areas or muddy areas where they might slip and fall. With those dew claws sticking down there, it helps to hold them firmly when they bound into the air. So Those all have a reason for being there. One of the things interesting about whitetail hoofs is that a good thing to know is the front hoof on the deer is bigger than the hind hoof. Now when a deer walks, typically the print of the hind hoof follows directly into the print made by the front hoof. And that's something. I don't know, you know, when a deer is walking, they're careful, especially when they want to be especially quiet, like they know there's a human over there, you know. They don't want to make a lot of noise and attract his attention. Especially true of big bucks. When they're walking, they can see what's in front of them, you know, with their eyes. And so when they step forward, they can see that I don't want to step on that branch right there because it's going to make a loud cracking noise if I do that when I put my weight on it. You can see, I can step over it or behind it so I don't do that. And then, as I make my next stick, my hind hoof will come forward and step into the same track made by the front hoof. That's kind of amazing. So that helps them to walk more quietly in the woods, which is kind of important if you're a prey animal of wolves and black bears and humans, when you want to be quiet. You see the cloven hoof here? Yeah, out the park there, you see the dew claws up there. But at any rate, the rear hoof is smaller. So when you measure a track, you're actually measuring the length of the front hoof. Now, there might be times like when deer are feeding, they zigzag a lot, go from one place to another. And when they're doing that a lot of times, and in a little short step, the hind hoof will hit the ground in a different spot than the front hoof. It won't follow cleanly in the print made by the front hoof, like when they're walking straight, going somewhere. So if you measure the hind hoof print, it might be smaller than the front hoof print. So if you're measuring hoof prints like that, keep in mind, let's see, I got to measure the biggest one here, this biggest hoof print, to determine what kind of a deer made these hoof prints. You know, because there'll be two sizes that'll be exposed there. When they're just walking somewhere, you'll just see the outer outline of the biggest hoof print, because that hind hoof print is inside that. So that you don't have to worry about. But when they're feeding, you'll have two sizes for each deer. Well, that's good to know. So things to know about hoofs. Now, for years, like I said, I used to measure the tip of the hoof to the dew claw measurement for measuring whitetail hoof prints. And in my old book here, my 4th edition, you'll find all kinds of information about measuring hoofs of whitetails, or hoof prints of whitetails. And all the measurements in here are tip to dew claw measurements. Now, after my years of studying whitetails in the South, from South Carolina to Arizona, where you don't often see dew claw prints in the ground, I said, you know, I got to change that. So I did that. Now, in my Whitetail Hunter's Almanac, in my 10th edition, my new Almanac, I think it's page 174, I think it is. Let's look here. Yeah, there it is. No, 172. I have a chart here of hoof measurements for hoof only, not including the dew claw. This is the first time I've published something like that, except for my, I've got an e-book. You know, if you don't know about that one, I got an e-book. I've previously published a tract guide on Amazon. You'll find it on Amazon. It's only $5. But it's several pages that tells you all kinds of things about tracks you won't find anywhere else except in this book, and then some more in this book actually. And that's track measurements only in that book for identifying this. That's kind of a neat guide because you can transfer that, you can download it onto your cell phone and have all that information in your cell phone when you're out there scouting or hunting in the woods. And you so here's a track, and if you don't remember all these things, and that's easy to forget, you already know it. There's a whole bunch of these tracks to deal with. You can check it on your cell phone and have it handy that way. So that's kind of a neat thing to have. So for $5, you can't beat that. But anyway, this is hoof only measurements. The little dew claw point are on these pictures here, but this is for just the hoof part only, the measurements here. Now, let's look at a few other things here. Let me show you a series of pictures here. For example, here's a fawn. And on one side of the picture, here's the fawn, and on the other side is a typical fawn hoof print with a ruler on it. You know, I carry a steel tape with me all the time in the woods, and also you can my sign guides too. Each of those cards on the sign guide, like this thing here, has a ruler on the edge. And you can see that track on the ground, you can lay that down on there, measure it, and you look at that, oh, that deer made that track. You know, that's kind of handy. So, it's all in one kind of thing. But here's a fawn, and here's typical track. You see it's a little track, here's the measurement on it. This fawn, typical in the beginning of our firearm hunting season in November, will weigh about 80 pounds. And his track can be anywhere from 2 to 2 3/8 inch in length. And the reason there's a difference is 85% of fawns are born in May. Those that don't breed in November will be in heat again in December, a month later, 28 days later. And they'll have fawns that are born in June. So if it's a June fawn, if the fawn was born in June, it won't have tracks as large as tracks of a fawn born in May. And 5% of fawns are born in July. And not only are those, you know, because the mother wasn't bred in November or December, and was bred in 28 days later in early January, for example. So it'll be a lot later. It'll have little 2-inch long tracks in November. And so there's a variance there on fawns. Okay, next picture. Here's a yearling dull. And it's 20 pounds, 30 pounds lighter than a mature doe. In the next year, it's going to gain 20, 30 pounds and be a little bigger deer. But by the end of the year, you know, by the time they're yearlings, well, all the does where we hunt will have tracks that measure 2 5/8 inch length. There might be an eighth of an inch difference, but in some. Now, here's a mature doe. Now, a mature doe is anywhere from 2.5 to up to 14 years of age, 14 and a half years of age. Those live quite a bit longer than bucks. Not a lot of them get to be 14. That's more likely to be a doe that's in captivity in a fenced area that lived that long. But some of them will live 10, 12 years of age out there in the wilds. But they don't get bigger, you know, their skeletons don't get larger during those later years. They stay pretty much the same after they're 3.5 years of age. From they're pretty steady from then on, and their hoofs don't change in length either. So, but anyway, So here's one there, and a mature doe's hoof print will be 3 to 3 1/8 inch. Sometimes they'll be a little over 3 inches in length. So that's pretty typical for a doe. So that kind of goes along with this picture here. Now, this next picture, this is a 2.5-year-old buck. Now he's a mature buck now, you know, but not quite. He's still growing. He's still getting bigger in size in following years. This deer will have tracks that will measure 3 3/8 inch in length. So usually where we hunt, we don't pay much attention to bucks with tracks less than 3.5 inches in length. We want them to be bigger bucks, you know. We ignore those unless one happens to come out the last day and we're 1 buck short of our annual 4-buck self-imposed limit. We might take that buck. So we have adequate Venice for our gang, which can consist of up to 12 people. And that's plenty for us. This next one is a buck 3.5 years of age. Right next to him you'll see his tracks there. And typical for a 3.5-year-old, his hooves are not yet quite as long as they're going to be. They'll be a little bit bigger. But typically where we hunt, you'll have track lengths about 3.5 inches or 3 3/4 inch in length. Tracks. We see tracks 3 3/4. That's a pretty nice buck. That's a buck that's going to be hard to pass up. A 3.5-year-old buck in the woods. He'll have his antlers won't have the diameters that he'll have when he's a 4.5. From that time on, he's going to have a lot of bulk in those antlers. The bases will be pretty large. They can be 1.5 inches in diameter and even greater, you know, on these older bucks when they come out of the buck's skull. But typically we see tracks there 3 1/2 or 3 3/4 inch length. We're saying 3.5-year-old buck. Well, we take quite a few bucks in that age group because those older ones are so doggone hard, difficult to hunt. We always feel fortunate, and we usually do it, but we feel real fortunate when we take a buck 4.5 to 6.5-year-old buck, just one of them, for hunting season. I don't remember a hunting season ever in all my life where we've taken 2 of them during the hunting season. One is usually it. We call it, boy, this is a big buck. This is a real trophy, this buck. It's going on the wall for sure. Well, 3.5-year-old bucks can be in that class too. They can be pretty darn good and end up on the wall, especially if you haven't been successful for many, many years. And a lot of 3.5-year-olds, a guy will walk in your house and he'll see that buck and goes, boy, that's a nice buck. Is he in the record book? I might ask you even, you know, not knowing. Most of the bucks we take that we consider real trophies have antlers that measure between 150 and 160. And beyond that, they're rare. Back where we used to hunt in Aiken Colony, we saw a lot of bucks, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but many bucks that went into the 170s were actually record book bucks. But where we hunt now, that's really rare. There's only been 2 I know of. One was non-typical that made the record book in 30 years in that region. So they just don't have, we get huge animals, but not necessarily huge bucks. But it doesn't matter. The hoof measurements still tell you what kind of a deer made the tracks. Anytime we see a track that's 3 3/4 to 4 inches, that's a buck worthy of hunting. And those are the bucks we're going to key on, the bucks that made tracks that large.
Hey guys, John Nordberg here. Because of the coronavirus precautions, I have to step in for my father and make a few additions to the video for him. As my father just mentioned, many years ago in the 1970s, my father did research on tract sizes. This first chart was especially important. It related the ages of deer to their weights. From this chart, you can pick an age for a buck or a doe and estimate its weight or the range of weights it might have. This second chart was also very important. It relates the weight of the deer to its tract length. Again, this chart is from research that started in the 1970s, and the length of the tracts are from the tips of the hooves to the dew claws. Obviously, this research data was not very hunter-friendly. That is why we created the sign guides. Our sign guide, called Fall Tracts, contains hunter-friendly track lengths, but again, they are for the full length of the track. Both our ebook, the Tract Guidebook, and our latest Whitetail Hunter's Almanac contain the updated track information for just the hoof lengths. Again, you could use the weights from the first chart, plug them into this chart, get the total lengths of the tracks, and then multiply by 2/3 to get the length of just the hooves. I provide 3 examples here for you. You may wish to pause the video and think about them. As I edited this video, I had some extra time due to the coronavirus, so I did this kind of detailed analysis for every major class of whitetail. What I came up with was a very detailed and technical chart. The most important result of this complex chart is very simple. If you see a whitetail hoof print that measures 3 1/4 inches long or longer, it is a buck. For those of you who would like to see my complex chart, here it is. Just pause the video and take a look at it. Obviously, you need to view this information on a computer with a larger screen. Let me explain one of the technical terms that you will see here. The terms minimum, maximum, and average are statistical terms that most people know. However, most people are not familiar with the term mode. When it comes to buck tracks, the average size, halfway between the minimum and maximum, is not normally the most common size. The term mode refers to the most commonly seen size. At least for the big-bodied bucks we hunt up by the Canadian border, that seems to be about 1/8 of an inch greater than the average size. Now, we admit our view of the most common size may have been skewed slightly from hunting in this area for the last 30 years. Finally, when my father was going through examples of bucks versus track sizes, I didn't notice that he forgot to cover 3 ages: 4.5-year-old bucks, 5.5-year-old bucks, and 6.5-year-old bucks. Here are the graphics for each. When I photographed this extremely large buck track, I didn't have anything to measure it with, so I put my hatchet down next to it. The head of the hatchet is about 4 7/8 inches long. While that looks like a 6-inch track, keep in mind that was soft soil. Notice how deep the track is. The hoof seems to have slid forward a little bit as the track was made. Close by, I also found 1 1/4 inch droppings. Here's the photo for the 6.5-year-old buck. Thank you for your patience while I added this information.
You can't do this. You can't key on big bucks and expect to be taking big bucks every year if you don't recognize the value of track measurements. If you don't key only on deer that have 3 3/4 to 4 inches, tracks that measure 3 3/4 to 4 inches in length, where I hunt. Now the further south you go, south of the line, say from southern Iowa, maybe Nebraska included, all the way to southern Virginia, deer north of that will have tracks that pretty much measure the same as they do here in Minnesota, and west to the Cascade Mountains of Washington. Those whitetails will have tracks that pretty much are just like I've been explaining them, same measurements. South of there, deer are smaller. The further south you go, and the warmer the average temperature, the smaller the deer tend to be. until you get down, well, in Virginia, in the Great Dismal Swamp in the southeastern part of that state, deer don't get to be very large at all. They're really kind of a special subspecies, where if you get a buck that weighs 110 pounds, that's considered pretty big for that buck in that area. In the same way, the Great Dismal goes into northeastern North Carolina as well. A snake-infested swamp, but there's a lot of deer out there. And then down in Florida, you got little deer, little deer that get to be even smaller than Great Dismal Swamp deer. So that deer sort of unusual. But generally, deer south of this line are smaller, and progressively smaller as you go. You get down into Texas, if you get a buck that weighs 125 pounds live, that's a pretty nice deer. There's some that get bigger than that. But those darn bucks down there have great genetics for large antlers. Gee, you get bucks that size with all kinds of them that are in the record book today, you know, 180, 190, 200, and some inch antlers on them. And speaking of that, you know, I had a guy that worked for, was a Secret Service man who came to one of my hunting schools. And he told me that one of our presidents, President Johnson, liked to hunt whitetails on his ranch down there in central part of Texas, near Austin, I think it is. Now, south central part of Austin has lots of cactus and brushy areas that have lots of deer in them. Deer love those places, and they're pretty safe there. And down there, they don't have big trees, so you can get out there, all the prickly pear, and it's kind of a mess down there. So, what they really like down there, so-called Texas towers for hunting in those places, stand hunting in those places. There's three-legged things with a plastic pod up on top of the door and window, and according to what this guy said, President Johnson had one of those Texas towers out in a big cactus brush area on his ranch. And being the president, this pod it had wires going, telephone wires going out there, including phones for at the White House and the red phone, which I believe was the phone that was used for only a very special thing, to react anytime a belligerent power around the world sent some ICBM rockets into the air in the direction of the United States. And at that time, we always had bombers with nuclear bombs on them, and we had big ICBMs in silos all around the country, and he could pick up that phone and get those things operating immediately, and even while he was out deer hunting in one of his Texas towers. Kind of an interesting story. But at any rate, but you know, so the deer down there are smaller but have great antlers, which isn't fair. And we have huge deer and not so great genetics for large antlers. So, but that doesn't matter. We love where we hunt. We wouldn't change it for anything. So that's why we hunt there regardless. Well guys, before I leave, be sure to poke that subscribe button down there. Come on, be a regular subscriber. It doesn't cost you anything. All it does is you give them the information, like your I don't get it. They don't let me have it. You'll get your they'll get your email address, and by doing that, they'll warn you right away. Oh, Dr. Nordberg's got a new YouTube presentation on, and there's a lot of guys that can't wait to see that, and guys that write me notes that every day is a good day when I find a new Dr. Nordberg seminar on YouTube. Press that thumbs up button too, would you please? I know you enjoyed this seminar, so be sure to do that. Get your book. You know, you'll never be sorry you did. And with this darn flu thing going around, it'd be kind of a pleasant way to spend your time at home. reading this book. You're going to really love this book, and the photos and that prove what I'm talking about. And so get your book and relax and learn. And you start doing, you'll learn all about tracks in there and other deer signs as well. And you're going to learn some in future, of my future hunting seminars as well. But this is your permanent record, the one you have at home. You can look in here 2 years later, what did Dr. Nordberg say about this or that? And you'll find it in here and you can refer back to it. Oh yeah, geez, I've been missing that. I've done this wrong. I'm glad I got the book, because now it got me back on track doing the right things. So with that, thanks again guys for watching, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again soon. Bye for now. Be sure to visit my website. Here's the link. Here you'll find links to my blog posts, my Twitter account, my YouTube account, my Amazon store with links to my ebooks, my son's eBay store, a money saver if you're ordering from Canada or other countries, my website bookstore, and much more.